When I was 9 years old, my parents and I moved to a farm next to my maternal grandparents' place. I was excited about the idea of living on a farm, away from the city, but even then, there was something unsettling about the move. The air felt different, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right, though I couldn't put my finger on it. At first, everything seemed normal. We would visit my grandparents on weekends, and it was just like any other family gathering, lots of food, laughter, and stories. But soon, I started noticing a strange shift, especially during those weekends. There was a tension in the air that wasn't there before, something I couldn't understand at that age but could definitely feel. My grandfather, who was usually calm and quiet, started acting oddly. As time went on, the atmosphere on the farm grew increasingly heavy. It wasn't just the unease I felt, but things around the house started changing. I began noticing how strange my grandfather's behavior was becoming, especially during those weekend gatherings. He wasn't the same man, and I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to him. During the weekend barbecues, my grandfather's behavior began to change in ways I couldn't understand. He would start drinking, as he always did, but something about him shifted after a few drinks. His voice would change, low, harsh, and almost unrecognizable. It was as if someone else was speaking through him, a voice full of anger and aggression. It was nothing like the kind, patient man I knew. The transformation was startling. He would lash out at people, yelling at family members and even getting physical. I remember seeing him shove my uncle once, just because he had bumped into him by accident. The room would fill with tension and fear, as everyone tried to stay calm while my grandfather seemed to spiral deeper into this strange, violent state. It wasn't just an occasional outburst, it was like he became someone entirely different, someone dark and dangerous. The atmosphere during those times was thick with discomfort. No one really knew how to handle it. My grandmother would try to intervene, but it was as if her words didn't reach him. The whole family would stand frozen, not sure if they should try to stop him or just stay quiet. It felt like something was controlling him, something sinister that none of us could explain. The rest of us would just try to avoid his wrath, hoping the night would pass without more damage. As the incidents grew more frequent, the tension on the farm became unbearable. There was no escaping it, my grandfather's behavior haunted every gathering. We all knew something was wrong, but we couldn't put our finger on what it was. It felt like there was an invisible force driving him to madness, and none of us knew how to stop it. The whole place felt cursed. During these episodes, strange and inexplicable things started happening around the house. It was like the house itself was reacting to my grandfather's sudden outbursts. I remember one night, during one of those chaotic moments, a jar flew out of the kitchen cupboard and crashed onto the floor. No one had touched it, no wind, nothing. Then it happened again, pots and pans started falling, some even shattering. It wasn't just the noise, it was the sheer force with which the objects seemed to fly, as if something invisible had tossed them. At first, we tried to ignore it. We thought maybe it was just the stress of the situation, but the air in the house grew heavier every day. The strange occurrences became more frequent, more violent. I started to feel like the house itself was alive, like it was responding to my grandfather's rages, almost feeding off of them. The unease was unbearable. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something far beyond what we could see. One evening, I overheard my grandmother talking to my mother in a hushed voice. She said that it wasn't my grandfather causing all the chaos. She believed that something evil had taken over him, something malicious that would possess his body whenever he drank. Her words were chilling. She called it the spirit of the farm, something dark that had been there long before we arrived. She insisted that this evil force had its grip on my grandfather, and it terrified me to think that there might be something more than just his strange behavior at play. I couldn't stop thinking about what my grandmother said. If what she believed was true, then my grandfather wasn't in control of his own body anymore. He was just a vessel for something far more terrifying. The fear in my grandmother's eyes when she spoke only deepened my own dread. How could we fight something that had been there long before us? I started to wonder if we were all in danger, trapped in a nightmare we didn't understand. The next day, after the most intense episodes, my grandfather seemed to return to his usual self. He was calm, collected, and completely unaware of the chaos he had caused the night before. He laughed it off, joking about how he must have had too much to drink, but there was something deeply unsettling about his complete lack of memory. It was as if the man who had terrorized us just hours earlier had never existed. No one spoke of what had happened, but the silence in the house was deafening. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Was my grandfather truly possessed, as my grandmother claimed, or was there something else at play here, something even darker? The more I thought about it, the more I began to question everything. What was causing him to act so violently, so unpredictably? And why couldn't he remember anything? It felt like we were stuck in some twisted cycle, where things would return to normal for a brief moment, only to spiral back into chaos when we least expected it. My grandmother tried to comfort me, her voice trembling with fear as she told me that everything would be okay. She told me not to worry, that my grandfather was just an old man and sometimes got a little too carried away with his drinking. But the way she said it, her eyes darting around nervously, only added to my fear. There was no reassurance in her words, only more questions and a growing sense of dread that something was lurking just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. As the days passed, the uneasy calm lingered. The house was quieter, but the tension remained thick in the air. I couldn't forget the things I had seen, the things that had happened. The fear of what might come next gripped me tightly, and I couldn't help but feel that the worst was still ahead of us. After nearly 2 years of living with the strange events, my family finally made the decision to leave the farm. The air was thick with tension, and the terror we had all experienced had become too much to bear. We packed up our things in silence, as though leaving would somehow erase what had happened. But deep down, I knew the fear wouldn't just disappear with a change of scenery. It had embedded itself in my mind, in the walls of that house, and in the very air we breathed. Even after we moved away, I couldn't shake the memories. The sounds, the sights, the feeling of something watching us, it all lingered in my mind, haunting me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I'd lay awake at night, wondering if that evil was still out there, waiting for someone to return. Was it truly gone, or had it merely been dormant, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too close? I couldn't answer that, and I still don't think I ever will. The farm itself remained a mystery to me. I never heard about anyone else living there after we left, and over the years, I've heard rumors that the place is now abandoned. But I can't help but feel that something malevolent still lingers there, in the silence, in the shadows of the trees, in the very soil beneath the ground. It's as if the land itself holds a dark secret, one that will never be revealed, no matter how much time passes. I still think about the farm sometimes, especially when the wind picks up or when the sky turns an unsettling shade of grey. And every time I do, a chill runs down my spine. Some things can never truly be forgotten. The evil on that farm, whatever it was, never left, not completely. It's still there, waiting. And I can't help but feel that one day, it might return. When I was a child, I had a large collection of dolls and stuffed animals, but my dolls were something else. They looked so realistic, like tiny babies. Their lifelike appearance made them seem almost too real, but at the time, I didn't mind. I loved playing with them, arranging them in different positions on the shelf, and pretending they were my little family. One night, I remember my parents watching a horror movie in the living room. It was about some object possessed by a dark spirit or demon, something to do with a cursed goat, I think. I wasn't scared at all, though. I never really enjoyed horror movies, and they didn't affect me much. So, I went to bed just like any other night, indifferent to whatever creepy things were happening on the screen in the next room. I lay down to sleep, not caring about the movie or the strange things my parents were watching. The night felt normal, and I drifted off to sleep easily. Little did I know, that night would be far from normal. The strange events that followed would haunt me forever. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night, the room still dimly lit by my night light. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something odd. My stuffed dog, which I always kept on the shelf during the day, was now lying on the floor. I hadn't touched it before going to bed, so it caught me off guard. I didn't think much of it at first, maybe it just fell. I got up, still half asleep, and sat on the floor, instinctively grabbing the stuffed dog. I started playing with it absent-mindedly, my eyes heavy with sleep. The soft glow of the lamp cast eerie shadows across the room, but it was the only source of light. I barely registered how tired I felt, but I continued playing with the stuffed dog, my mind wandering as I tried to wake myself up. Suddenly, an overwhelming sense of exhaustion hit me, and I decided to get back into bed. As I stood up, ready to lie down again, something strange happened. Without warning, one of my dolls, one that was on the high shelf above my bed, fell down and landed directly on my back. The impact was so sudden, so forceful, that I froze, completely paralyzed with fear. As I was about to get back into bed, trying to shake off the feeling of unease, something completely unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, one of my dolls, one that had been placed high up on the shelf, fell with a violent thud, landing squarely on my back. The force of the impact was so intense, it felt as though something had thrown it at me on purpose. My heart raced as a wave of terror washed over me. The doll, now on the floor, was lying face up, its eyes staring at me eerily in the dim light. I screamed in sheer panic, my voice trembling as I ran out of my room. I couldn't stop shaking. Without thinking, I tossed the doll aside, the face still pointed toward the ceiling. My feet moved on their own, as if my body was desperately trying to escape something I couldn't explain. I bolted straight to my parents' room, the only place I felt safe. My mind was racing with confusion and fear, but I couldn't make sense of what had just happened. I burst into their room, my heart pounding in my chest. My mother, half awake, tried to calm me down, asking me what was wrong. Between sobs, I tried to explain what had just occurred, how the doll had fallen on me, and how it felt so wrong, almost deliberate. But my mom, still groggy and not fully understanding, assured me that it was just a coincidence. She told me I was probably dreaming or imagining things, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just a bad dream. The terror I felt was all too real. My mother, now fully awake, walked quickly towards my room, following my frantic cries. I couldn't stop shouting, explaining to her through sobs that the doll wanted to grab me. I kept repeating it over and over, but no matter how much I screamed, I felt like my words weren't enough to explain the terror that consumed me. My mind was still racing, unable to understand what had just happened, but I knew something was terribly wrong. When we finally reached my room, the sight that greeted us was even more horrifying than I could have ever imagined. There, on the shelf where my doll had been earlier, it was now sitting up. Its arms were outstretched, as if it were reaching for something or someone. It looked almost human in its posture, but there was something deeply unsettling about it, something wrong and menacing. The doll's face was frozen in an eerie expression, its eyes still wide open and staring. I could barely hold myself together at the sight. Tears streamed down my face as I began to sob uncontrollably. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing, and the fear gripped me with an iron fist. Desperate and unable to calm down, I clung to my mother's waist, crying harder than I ever had in my life. Between sobs, I pleaded with her to donate all of my dolls. I begged her to get rid of them, terrified that something darker and more sinister was lurking in my room. I couldn't bear the thought of them anymore, not after what I had just witnessed. From that night on, I developed an irrational, deep-seated fear of dolls. I couldn't even bear to be near them without my heart racing and my body trembling. Every time I saw a doll, even from a distance, I felt an overwhelming wave of terror crash over me. The thought of their lifeless eyes, their cold, stiff limbs, was enough to send me into a panic. I couldn't understand why, but the fear gripped me in a way that nothing else could. Over the years, I tried to force myself to overcome the trauma. I would try to be brave, to look at dolls in stores, or even to touch one in the safety of my own home, but each time I failed. The image of that doll, sitting with its arms outstretched, haunted me. I couldn't forget the way it looked, as if it were really trying to grab me, pulling me into some unfathomable darkness. No matter how hard I tried, the fear never truly went away. To this day, I can't stand to see a doll. The mere sight of one is enough to send me spiraling into a state of panic, and I can't help but remember the terror I felt that night. The memory of the doll's outstretched hands, of its sinister position on the shelf, continues to haunt me. It's a fear that has stayed with me, lurking in the back of my mind, and I don't think I'll ever be able to escape it. That experience changed me, and the shadow of it still lingers, even now.